to our main camera and get the ball rolling. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If it's Saturday morning, it means the Cafe BTW is open. I got my coffee. I got a guest today, which I'm super excited about, who has a really cool last name. It's Nate Benderama. If I'm saying that wrong, Nate, please correct me. But is that your last name, sir?
Well, my last name is Nate. It's Nate Bender is my last name, but I like to say like the robot from Futurama.
So your name actually is Nate Bender. So Benderama is like an added effect that you added.
I think they did. I think they did an episode at one point called Benderama, and I was like, that's my my Twitter name. There we go.
Got it. Okay, because I was like, whoa, that's pretty random last name there. But even having a name like Bender is pretty awesome, to be honest with you. But yeah, man, thanks for coming to the Cafe BTW podcast. Today is going to be really fun. Nate is a really cool guy that does a really cool show called Let's Play, gaming news show, which we'll get into, Nate, and talk a little bit about what you do around the podcast world. You have an awesome voice. You got that.
Thank you.
That very good radio voice. And good morning, Retro Game Brews. Thanks for stopping by, man. Really excited again. Just want to let everyone know we are back at this thing. We had last week, Nate, we had a really great YouTuber who you might have heard of called Classic Gaming Quarterly. He's a really cool guy, retrospective guy. We talked about the history and retrospective of the Sega Genesis. But today we are talking about the history of sort of editorial journalism and how we consume media for video games kind of right before the internet and even earlier than that. And I think Nate is the perfect guy to do it with because he's a news guy. But Nate, going to put you on the spot to kick things off here. Let's go back in time with you, sir. What is your connection to video games? What's your story from a childhood story? Or, what was it? Was it your dad taking you to Babbage's back in the day? What was that story that really got you into your love of video games?
So I can't credit my parents. Well, I guess I could in a small way. So my very earliest memory of coming across video games, playing video games, was at a friend of my dad's. We were over at his house. He had just gotten a Nintendo, and they had Super Mario Brothers. And my dad tried to play it, and he's messing around with it for a half an hour, and he gets frustrated, and he just gives me the controller and says, "Here, you play with this." And I don't think I've ever seen my dad touch a video game ever since. It definitely, my love of video games definitely didn't come from my folks. I did always really enjoy fantasy stories, and I was always a big fan of knights and dragons and stuff. And so, when I discovered The Legend of Zelda, it was sort of a lock for me. And I can't remember where I got the cart. I'm not sure if I inherited it from a cousin who had just gotten a Sega Genesis, or if my parents had actually gone out and bought one. But I do still have my original Legend of Zelda and Legend of Zelda 2 carts, the gold carts, sitting on my shelf. So yeah. And I think that was just sort of the earliest that I can remember interest in video games, but it grew into sort of a healthy obsession by middle school, high school era. I was I was collecting PlayStation 1 games. I remember being absolutely enthralled by seeing the first Chrono Cross trailer at what was it, a EBX store in the mall. They had just
that's one a lot of people don't talk about. EBX. I had an EBX in my world too.
I think you had to be close to Canada for you to have an EBX, because I think they were a Canadian brand. And they only had a few stores here in the US. But I'm in Detroit, so we're right next to Windsor. So
you're practically Canadian.
Practically. The funny thing is that store, that EBX store, eventually, of course, became a GameStop, because Electronics Boutique got bought by GameStop, and I ended up working at that GameStop years and years later.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so kind of a full circle moment there.
That's awesome. And then, by the way, we got someone, a new chatter. Hall Gaming says, hello, Nate Bender.
Oh, hey, what's going on, Hall Gaming? How you doing, buddy?
And yeah, thanks everyone from the Nate Bender side for stopping by as well and hanging out with us. But that's cool, man. You know what's funny about my parents? They were oblivious to video games, but they were those parents that thought, oh, buying video games was just a part of what you did in the 80s and 90s for your child for their birthday or their holiday. I was lucky. Not all parents were like that. I had a friend whose parents like imprisoned him and said, you can only play a game every Friday for 1 hour. So his experience with games really sucked. But I'm really grateful that my parents didn't know anything, but also at the same time supported my love of gaming as a kid. Because there were a lot of parents that thought it was evil and sadistic and terrible and rots your brains, I'm
fortunate that my folks weren't like anti games, right? Like that could have been tough, but they mostly just didn't get it, which was fine. I think they thought it was like a waste of time or money, but what parent doesn't, even today, I'm sure in some respects they are, right? But they're a great fun pastime. But I was always real fortunate that my folks weren't like really authoritarian with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then getting into, and thanks for sharing kind of your connection. That's a beautiful way to go. And then the fact that you even worked at a video game store is a big deal too, in a lot of ways. What is it you do, Nate? Like, tell the world. I know that I discovered you on your wonderful daily news show. So if you're looking for a lot of keeping up on the new trends in gaming, Let's Play, which is an awesome podcast that you could find and consume on all the podcast medias. And if you do !Nate in chat, pulls up a link to his podcast and his Twitter. But Nate, give us a little background on you and how you even got to this point and you have a wonderful radio voice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, gosh, that's a really long story. So, back in high school, I was in a band, and I really enjoyed being in a band. But it was a punk band, right? So when I went to college right smack dab in the center of the state, where there is nothing. There's no interesting things, there's no interesting shows. And when I got there, I recognized, I'm like, oh, I'm the only one that's into this shit. And nobody else is even remotely interested in listening to like no one wants to hear that. No one. So
are we talking sick of it all, Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits? I know all this stuff. I was a hardcore guy. Okay.
I mean, like, definitely, but like even more so, like you can sort of think like Nausea or I'm trying to think of like bands that aren't too way too obscure, or like Fucked Up. Like Fucked Up was a band that sort of was like in the same scene that we were. And so, it was just very loud, very abrasive. But when it broke up, I had to figure out how to make friends, basically. All of my socialization had been done by music. I was working at a record store at the time. So it was like, that was the way that I made friends. And so I was like, oh, okay, I got to figure out how to make friends that isn't based around this music that I love. And I fortunately, because I was into punk music, it could have had an effect on my love of video games, but it didn't. So I socialized myself through video games. And there was one after, like, so me and all my friends, we played Final Fantasy 11, which this was like at the height of WoW. So it was sort of unique that we were playing Final Fantasy 11. And there was one day we were all eating dinner down at the dining commons, and we were talking about something that had happened in the game. And, for like, I'm watching my buddy tell a story, but more importantly, I'm like looking all around the room and realizing that everyone's watching us. Like everyone's looking at us. Nobody's talking, like nobody's having their own. They're just watching what we're doing because we're making such a scene. And I'm like, all right, there's something here. And this was in 2006. So this is like right at the very sort of like first wave of podcasts that are going out.
Oh, yeah.
And so
the early days.
Yeah, very, very early days. And so, I was a fan of a podcast called Sarcastic Gamer at the time. And I listened to a couple of other NPR podcasts. And so, we came up with this idea to do a show about Final Fantasy XI.
Ooh.
And that was Limit Break Radio. And so we took the equipment from my band, took the stage mics and started using them as podcast mics. And so we literally started that show in the basement of our dorm. We all lived in a dorm called Merrill Hall, and we would go into the basement where they had like a little meeting room with like a whiteboard and all kind. It was like made for studying, and we would go in there and just be absolute. We would create a morning show. It's like a morning radio show, but for Final Fantasy.
Ooh,
and
I love that.
Yeah,
especially back then, that's pretty unique and nichey for a back then podcast.
It was really unique because one of the things that we did, like the way that I had kind of described the show to the other guys and like had gotten them, gotten them on board, I was like, all right, imagine you're playing Final Fantasy XI and there's an item in the game and it's a radio and your character walks up to it and turns it on. What do they hear? That's what our show should be.
Yeah.
So it was like a show that took place inside of the world of Vana'diel. Wow. So, it wasn't like strictly meta. It wasn't so meta as to be like role play or anything, but we did refer to each other as character names. And, we would talk about mechanics as mechanics, but, our bits were sort of rooted in, Final Fantasy. We would refer to where we were in the world. Like we would say we're in Norg, that's where our studio was, which was a place in Vana'diel. So it was like all of these little things that sort of like, I think, made it playful and made it so we didn't take it too seriously. But we did that show all the way till 2011. And then all of us sort of graduated college and went off to the various places of the world. And one of the things that we did was we didn't have a final episode. We never really said goodbye in a way that was satisfactory, but it gave us a good opening to come back when they brought out Final Fantasy 14. And so, we all started talking to each other like, oh, should we get the band back together? not the band that I started talking about, but should we get Limit Break Radio back together? And so we did. And when we did, we said, we're going to treat this like a business. And so, we did episodes for a year before we decided to ask for any kind of money. And then we went to a crowdfunding campaign, and we had we would do the show live on Twitch because we wanted to do something really unique with our show. We wanted to take live callers, and in order to do that, you have to have a live transmission medium.
Sure.
So we started doing the show on Twitch, which led all of us to sort of like doing Twitch in an earnest way. None of us had ever tried live streaming before that. So that proceeded on until 2018 when I was working at a sports talk radio station, Detroit Sports 105.1, not giving a rip about any kind of actual sports. But I approached one of the guys that I work with, who I knew had worked with like ESPN network and stuff like that, and said, hey, so like, what's going on with esports? Is anyone even interested in like broadcasting about esports? And he's like, I haven't heard anything. And I was like, okay. So I gave him sort of a demo tape, and I was like, take a listen to this and let me know what you think. I think we might have something here. And he listened to it. He's like, I think that this is awesome. I think we can develop this into a show. And so Checkpoint XP was born. It was sort of spun out of Limit Break Radio and featured many of the same voices as Limit Break Radio. And so we developed that in this very studio that I'm sitting in right now, and ended up selling it to Beasley Broadcasting, and all 5 of us that were associated with the show went to work for Beasley full time.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we started making Checkpoint under the Beasley banner, and then the pandemic happened, and one by one, we all, kind of got let go from Beasley, and so when I was in this bit of downtime between the pandemic and just getting laid off, I was approached by a guy who works at a company called Sound That Brands, and we developed the idea of let's play together. So started that a little over a year ago. We had just celebrated our 1-year anniversary in October, and I see that you've got the some of the TikTok videos on screen. I have to, that show is really only sort of like 40% me. Aaron Pillen, who is the writer of Let's Play and responsible for a lot of, if not most of, the research.
Nice.
That goes into the show. Really, from there, it's just sort of a process of editing the script so it's more sort of in language that I would use. And he's also responsible for those absolutely amazing TikToks as well. So that I feel that I have to, I have to say that I'm only one part of Let's Play. I'm really only the voice. But Aaron is really sort of the driver of the content of Let's Play.
That's awesome. So and Let's Play has been around for how long?
About a year.
About a year.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it because like there's something about a really short form consumption of like a news. I need that sometimes. I'm very attached to the gaming industry, so your Let's Play show gives me what I need in like 5-6 minutes, right? That's your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was sort of a show that I was like, this is what I want, right? Like, it was born out of like, this is the type of show that I really need. I don't need, and this is coming from a guy, podcasters don't take this the wrong way, but this is and this is coming from a guy who's, previous podcast format was 4 guys sitting around a table talking about video games. But I've heard so many of those shows where it's just 4 dudes sitting around talking about video games. Sometimes they're not even talking about video games. That I was just like, I want something that's like really condensed, really focused, doesn't eat up a ton of the listeners' time, and that's sort of where Let's Play came in.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So I go back to podcasting as far back. I started podcasting in 2014 when Destiny came out, and we started one of the first Destiny podcasts.
Nice.
And we were one of the original Destiny we were called a Destiny podcast. And I love doing it. But the reason I created this show, because I had done other podcasts after that with a bunch of people, and it's hard when you rely on guest hosts to join you every week. Like there's a group of you, and like it's a band. And eventually you have to break up. So with this show, I'm more in control in a sense that I can do this show by myself, or I can have a guest like you and hang out with me. And I like that because I don't have to rely on someone anymore. And I, like my own host anymore.
Yeah.
It's just me, and I control the content, and I bring on the guests, and we have fun. And I kind of got away from the 3 people, 4 people in a room, which was fun though. But I like this style for me personally. But yeah, man, sounds like you're very, radio is your thing. And I'm glad that, to have another person that, me personally, I actually come from the entertainment industry, not the radio side, the video side. But, I used to say, man, I have the worst voice for podcasting, but I want to say that over time I've been doing this, my voice has gotten more and more comfortable, and I feel like I've become a better radio host because of all the podcast experience I've had. But anyway, thank you.
No, I definitely think that there's a lot of transferable skill there for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, dude, thanks for the whole awesome background. I love hearing those stories, and also because podcasting is a huge part of my history. The first podcast I ever listened to was MuggleNet, which was Harry Potter podcast, and one of the first podcasts back in 2008 that I remember listening to. And they were like the first non-serious podcast I could think of that was around. They were big. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They were a big deal in the Harry Potter world back then.
I'm sure I came across them. I'm sure I was looking at their iTunes charting at some point, going, we're gonna overtake you one day, I swear. The early, really, like the early days of podcasting were a lot of fun because there was a lot of more crossover. There was a lot more interest in like collaboration.
Yeah.
But not only that, like you could really hit on an idea, and because things like iTunes weren't completely saturated with content of all descriptions, you could have episodes that really pop off. I remember, in the early days, we were getting over 100,000 downloads every episode that we put out.
That's huge. Well, yeah.
It was massive.
Now everyone makes a podcast, and it's really easy to do a podcast. Back then, it was really hard to make a podcast.
Yeah,
you had to have
absolutely.
all the tools and the skills, and you had to know how to upload it and stuff. It wasn't easy. There was no Anchor.com and whatever to just like do it for you,
True. I had to hand code my RSS feed for 5 years before. Well, I was hand coding it when I was doing, still doing Limit Break Radio. But yeah, it's one of those things where, I'm glad for sort of the democratization of it. I love seeing more people, become a part of it. But it was really frustrating in the early days because, here we have this big audience, but like we have a bizarre concept. So, and there were no advertising agencies that were like, podcast specific at that point in like 2007, right? So it was like, I would approach an ad agency and they go, hey, we love your audience numbers, but like we don't understand like what your show is.
Yeah.
Like, and it was like, well, no amount of explaining is gonna, help a boomer to understand it's like an in-game version of a radio show. But whatever.
Yeah. Nowadays it's like common practice for podcast advertising and stuff like that.
But they don't care anymore at all. Like they absolutely like they're like, like, do you like they just do not care about the fucking content. They're just like, show me the audience numbers. It's the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
It's just true. A weird reversal of dichotomy.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, dude, thanks for all the heavy background and the awesome stories. I love it. And before we get into our topic, I do want to get into our topic today. Just going to do some dry cleaning over here. I'm going to let everyone know that, if you don't make the live, we do have a YouTube. I know it took me almost 2 years to finally have a YouTube, but we do have VODs available. And Nate, this will be up on VOD as soon as we're done. Hi, everyone that's watching on VOD, and thank you so much for joining live. So you can check that out at Cafe BTW. Also, Nate, don't know if you know this, but I run the Twitter retro gaming community. We are now we're at 1,928 members. And what is cool about this, Nate, is it's like a separate feed for you to be a part of our little community. I know Twitter is kind of a mess right now, so you could come into the retro gaming community and know that it's a safe place for you. But one thing, Nate, we're doing a holiday giveaway. And
Nice.
and this is from me personally to the community. And all you're gonna have to do on Monday, I'm gonna drop it on the 19th. And there's going to be 4 prizes. The top prize is a $60 gift card. The second prize is going to be the Dreamcast physical version of Echo the Dolphin Defender of the Future. The third prize is the NES cartridge Kung Fu Master Classic. And then the fourth prize is Game Boy Super Mario Land. And this is all from the bottom of my heart to the community. And also want to shout out to my mod in chat, Genzo Chicken, who is doing an Extra Life charity campaign. And Genzo, you're welcome to share that in chat. Just wanted to shout you out for all you're doing, sir. But yeah, Nate, a bunch of cool stuff happening. But let's get into the topic at hand, which is kind of like an idea of like, how did we consume gaming news and media before podcasts, before the internet? We're going to talk a little bit about the internet, but I want to go back in time. And I did some research, Nate. So according to the internet, it's funny, I'm using the internet to research about the past, which is just the way it is these days, right? So did some research. There was a magazine, an older magazine called Playmeter, and you might not have heard of this, but it's the first magazine to cover the arcade game industry. It was a subscription trade only periodical. And actually there's an article that goes as far back as 1974 about the early arcade industry with pinballs and stuff like that. And I'm not sure you ever heard of this. I didn't, but
I have not. No, I got to say, I love the artwork, like I would buy that and hang that on my wall. Like that is just a really cool piece of artwork.
Yeah, it's really neat. And I think that's just kind of like early video game. You think of like early video game art on Atari 2600 games where the games looked like crap, but the art on the cover was fantastic.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This was a time before AI art has taken over and destroyed the art community, one artist at a time, with what you could do with AI. But we're not going to get into AI today. Another article, moving up the chain a little bit, is something called, it was a column called Arcade Alley. So in North America, the first regular consumer-oriented column, apparently, around video games was in a column called Arcade Alley. In 1979, and I thought that was really cool. This is actually an actual look at one of the column of Arcade Alley, which it says here, a critical look at the video game cartridge games programs. And Nate, it's really interesting because this is a time where people weren't looking for this type of media. Video games are I mean, the 2600 dropped in 1977, but you think about it, it's like you couldn't just go to the internet and look up, oh, let me check out how good this 2600 game is. You really had to go buy it and experience it, you know?
Yeah, and it's even sort of before the mainstream outbreak of video game madness in like 1983, 1984. So it's really interesting to see sort of like consumer magazines take an active interest in what was going on in video gaming.
Yeah, and then moving up this timeline, the first consumer-oriented print magazine dedicated to video games, Nate, was called Computer and Video Games, which premiered in the UK on November 1981, a few months before I was even born. So there you go. I was born in 81. But this is obviously like an actual magazine as we moved up the timeline that is now featuring video games as the main essential topic. Well, look at all those ads, though.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of where we get to, you know, like what was the purpose of video game media? And you know, even when you go through, because I've got a Game Pro here, the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Encyclopedia, and as you just sort of flip through it casually, you know, you come across all, like, you know, full page ad, you know, more ads,
a lot of ads.
Yeah, like you know, video game media has always been inexorably linked with advertising, and part of it is that it is a great advertising vehicle. You know that the audience that's going to be interested in reading those things are going to be the same audience that's going to be interested in buying games. So you know you've got the Overton window there makes all the sense in the world. The thing is that, you know, as I think as gamers, as consumers, it really normalized having just a shitload of advertising in the media that we were consuming. And I think that there is, you know, you can sort of trace that all the way up until now, where you've got Twitch, who's completely inundating, the audience with ads, and the relationship between the audience and advertisement has completely shifted. And I think, you know, at least some of these magazines and early publications at least have something to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we know, Nintendo Power is probably the most notable magazine back from our childhood. But before Nintendo came out with Nintendo Power, they had the Nintendo Fun Club News. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this.
I'm not. No, but I've got I've got my own Nintendo Power here from January 1999, volume 116. With Castlevania, the 10-page monster review.
I love that, man. Look at these covers. Like, and by the way, just so you know,
classic.
What's really amazing, the Internet Archive is a website that has now worked really hard at digitizing all these old magazines. So you could actually go here for free and look through a lot of these old magazines, as I'm doing right here. But dude, look at all the colors and the display. This is just really the time. And you know what? The ads didn't bother me because they were cool. Like, there was a lot of really cool print ads, you know?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And you know, one of the things that I did for one of my podcast projects was actually go through a lot of these old video game magazines and Xerox the ads that are in there, and sort of do like a punk rock, like torn apart collage style piece of art for one of the podcast projects. So, but like when you're looking for it though, I think it really does drive home just how much, you know, advertising there is inside the pages of these magazines.
Yes, and we will get to Game Pro and kind of the 90s, where it kind of took off even more, where there was a bunch of different magazines. But I think we also have to mention the news. The news covered a lot of video game topics because, and I don't think that's Katie Chung. Sorry. Oh, it is. Oh, Katie Tong. Whoop. Sorry. I thought it was my bad. I do have a video of her as well, which she was a famous newscaster from back in the day. But this is an example of like how the news portrayed video games, because it was like a real topic. It was like, oh my God, there's electronic games. And I find these, and if you see a lot of my content, I try to find a lot of these old news reports, and I find them to be fascinating. This one is like way back in the early 80s, and you could tell by her clothes. But I really find these to be awesome, and really gives you like,
oh, look at that guy's mustache. That guy had a great mustache.
And then I have another one here, I believe. Let's see. Yes.
80s, by the way, just 80s eyewear in general is the best. Like they're all so horrible and chunky. I love 80s glasses.
So this is a 1982 news report by this guy, Barry Benson, I believe his name is. And he had thought he quoted the name of what we should call video games, and he called it high-tech rec. And
oh my God,
I did like high-tech recreation, I guess. But
oh, Jesus.
This was a real news series I believe this guy was in, I think it was in the New York area, but he called it high-tech rec, and I find it funny because that never catched on.
Oh no,
I don't think anyone ever called it high-tech rec.
Oh God, no one, not a single person.
But look at the glasses. You're right. The glasses. Everyone's got like those really interesting glasses on.
Oh, they're all.
Look at him and his pants and his.
Oh my God! Wait,
this guy
hang on. Who dressed him? Who dressed him for the? Because like, yeah, like who? I want those plaid pants. Yeah, dude, I want his wardrobe.
He's cool, man. And then this is a famous, actually, I think this was ABC did Nuts for Nintendo. And this is actually Jim Fossil. Jim Tossel? I don't know. I forget his name. This guy right here. He's still a predominant news guy. But this is him waiting in line to get like Super Mario World 2. And he did a whole news report about it, interviewing people. This is actually a really good kind of look back series. It's called Nuts for Nintendo Special on ABC 2020. So this is 1980. This is 1988 now. But this really drives home, like, you know, how we used to, you know, be kids playing the NES back home. But again, this is just an example of the news featuring video games, which they still do today. But you know, back then we didn't have the internet, so you would turn your nightly news on. But they would really take this seriously and interview all these people in the gaming world. And I just love taking a look back at that stuff. It's really, really cool. Also, another show very notable, which is a little bit more serious, and they really broke down, is Computer Chronicles. I'm not sure you ever heard of the show before. So
No.
Computer Chronicles ran from the 80s all the way into like the mid 90s. But they were really cool because they really highlighted a lot of video game developers back in the day. So there were people from like Sega, the guy who created EA and 3DO, and like a lot of really cool. This guy is actually talking about like a 2600 game that came out, and this is a good game. I forget the name of it. It's where you like take off in space. Is it called Spaceship? I forget what it's called, but
I think it's Space Shuttle.
Space Shuttle, which is actually, if you watch this interview, he actually describes that they kind of tried their best to recreate that experience of the Space Shuttle taking off, because it was based on an actual Space Shuttle event, this game.
Wow.
And this guy's talking about it, and actually it's a pretty, and there's his glasses. He's got the tinted ones too.
Yeah.
Look at those. Could do a whole podcast about these glasses.
Seriously.
DMC says in chat, my favorite news coverage was when they interviewed parents about the SNES and them feeling it ripped them off.
I remember that, because they were like, yeah, you know, you have a Nintendo at home and this is now a new version, and they're like, yeah, I think that's a ripoff.
Yep.
That's funny.
Because we didn't really understand like the next iteration of a console back then. Like we didn't get that. This is also a very famous show back in the UK area called Bad Influence, which was also a show that way ahead of its time, honestly. I didn't discover Bad Influence until the internet, because I would watch their YouTube shows, because obviously us being Americans, we didn't have access to see this show back when we were kids. But Bad Influence is excellent. Really, like kind of like an X-Play G4 type show, way before that stuff was even happening.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like the Nick Arcade set, like
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, the way that it's done up, but like it's great early 90s sort of television there. I've seen parts of this show before, because I recognize the female presenter.
Yes,
yeah,
and she is actually, I forget her name, and I apologize, but she's on Twitter and stuff, because I remember I posted like a clip, and then someone tagged her, and she still like posts a lot of her Bad Influence stuff. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And then I want to get into this. This is important to mention. It wasn't news, but it was a way to consume your media and understand how to beat a game, and that's the Nintendo hotline, 1-900 Nintendo hotline that was available to people. So this is important. This was a way you figured out.
They actually used to pay people to man these phones.
Yeah.
It's bizarre to think of now. But yeah, there were people whose entire job was to sit around and give video game advice. It's like an early version of a Twitch stream.
For $1.50 a minute, which back in the early 90s,
that's
late
insane.
80s. That's, I mean, inflation. What is it, like $5 a minute maybe back then? I don't know.
Something like that, yeah.
Crazy. And then we get into kind of the late 80s, 90s, where video game magazines kind of really took off. This is Game Fan. And here's like a good example of an ad. Like, this is a Shadow of the Empire's ad. Even though it's an ad, it is so cool. You know, it is like phenomenal. I don't know if you're familiar with Game Fan. I wasn't a huge person, but here's Game Pro, which I think was one of the funnest magazines out there.
Game Pro is great. Hang on, I have got my Game Pro from November of '98.
Ooh.
And I paid $4.99 for it. So there you go with the inflation. But it's issue number 122, talking about Turok 2.
Ooh, not a bad game. Not a bad game. We actually had the sound designer of Turok on the show before. Can you believe it?
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, it was cool. He did believe it or not, he did Space Quest sound design, and then he did Turok 1 and 2 sound design. Oh, wow. That was a really cool that was a while back. That was really fun because he really gave a lot of perspective on that stuff. And did you know GamePro had a TV show with JD Roth here?
I feel like I did. Yeah. I feel like I haven't seen. Oh my God. No, I don't. This is not. I don't recognize any of this, so I don't think I've ever seen it. But I think I only knew about it. I'm actually trying to figure out why I would have bought this issue of GamePro, because I was never that big of a Turok fan. But I think it's so. 5 blowout strategies here at the bottom for Street Fighter Alpha 2, Rival Schools, WWF Warzone, Madden NFL 99, and NFL Game Day 99. Remember when there were 2 NFL games competing?
Yeah, before the NFL license got taken over by EA. Yes, of course.
Yes, exactly. But I think I must have bought this for WWF Warzone because I played a lot of that game.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. But look at, you could tell the time period by this guy's jacket. So
totally. Oh my God, look at that jacket.
And the shirt that his co-host is wearing.
Dude, and the like presentation TV is like it's not even a 24-inch. No. It's like a 19-inch TV.
It's so funny. And this is just like throws back to just like you just don't see this stuff anymore, and it's just really cool. And so where do I get this jacket, Nate?
Seriously. So what? This has got to be like what? Like
1990. Right here is 1990.
Oh, 1990. Oh my God.
Right? And a lot of people don't remember this show. And this is another magazine called Games Players Magazine. I didn't really read this one too much.
Yeah, that's not one that rings a bell.
But then one of my favorites is Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM.
Yeah.
This one was one of my favorites for sure.
I've got my EGM issue here from August of 2000, the Soul Reaver 2, which I 100% bought for the Soul Reaver 2 preview because I was a big Legend of Kain fan.
I love it. And hey, Bricks of Brian, good to see you, man. We need this level of stage design today. More fog machines, please. Yes,
absolutely.
You are absolutely correct, sir. Absolutely. And then I do want to squeeze into the very early internet consumption of video game news.
Hold on, before we move off of off of television, because there was a really important one that happened in 93? Cybermania, which was the very first 94, excuse me. Cybermania 94 was the very first award show for video games.
Oh, here we go. I did not know. Really?
You have to watch this.
Wow.
Everybody needs to watch this. You can see Matt Perry there, but like
Leslie Nielsen,
hosted by Leslie Nielsen and the kid from
Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
There we go. So let me just give you some of the highlights here that you absolutely cannot miss.
I need to feature this on my TikTok or something.
It is so good. It is a classic. So they have a bizarre performance by Herbie Hancock. You get a very young Will Arnett reporting from an arcade competition, and you get William Regal and Brian Pillman coming out and doing wrestling moves and like at the end of the bit, like Leslie Nielsen is supposed to fire a gun in the air to get him to stop, but the gun won't fire. It is one of the worst train wrecks I've ever seen on television, but one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And there's that Herbie Hancock performance right there. But the most interesting thing about this has got to be the fact that Jeff Keighley was one of the producers. So he was involved with the earliest days of giving out awards for video games. Like he's got the pedigree, man.
Yeah, and we will get into Jeff because I have a story to share about Jeff. I worked for Jeff by the way.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I'll get into that in a second. This is cool, man. I did not know about this, and this excites me.
It's such a moment in time, and my favorite part about this is that it still has all of the original commercials in there. So like you get it's a time capsule.
Oh my God.
And the games that they're giving awards to were games that I have never heard of in my entire life. So that's also really fun too.
Oh my God, that's great. I'm gonna look through this, man. That's it's a 2-hour video here.
Yeah,
Cybermania 1994, the Ultimate Gaming Awards. That's really cool. Oh my God.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Yeah, so we're at like kind of the tail end of this thing. IGN.com was and this is actually a screenshot from November 5th, 1999.
Wow.
So I remember, the way IGN worked back then is you would actually have sections. So there would be the IGN 64 page. There would be the and it wasn't like it all like consumed into one page. It kind of did, but really you were more focused on the different sections they had. And this was the first time I remember personally, besides doing like message boards and talking to people in the industry and people that were playing games, this is the first time I consumed news through the web. And I was one of those kids that was lucky. My dad was really into computers, so we always had, we'd go to CompUSA and buy those stupid Pentium computers, and like, but to think that 1999 you could go on the internet and get some gaming news, that's pretty remarkable in a lot of ways. Obviously, forums, Nate, were a big way to indulge gaming news, facts, or figure out, how to get through a certain game. Then we started getting more TV shows like the early Tech TV, which eventually, obviously Adam Sessler.
Oh my God, Adam Sessler with hair.
Look at that hair. Oh my God.
Yeah, he really had a horrible hairline even when he was young.
He really did. He's always looked old. He's always looked that way. It's funny.
Did he have to bleach his hair? That didn't help at all.
I think that was the time when bleaching your hair was cool. Remember that? Like that was
the thing. I do, because I bleached my hair. I remember that.
But here's X-Play back in 2005. This is kind of like at the height of G4, and here's more of the general Adam Sessler without the bleached hair we know and love. And then Morgan Webb, who in my eyes was an awesome representative of the female space at a time where, female gamers didn't really have a say, and she really represented that, and she knows her shit. And now today, she works for a studio that she helped found, and she's in more of the publishing side of gaming now.
Yeah, it's a subdivision of Microsoft, right?
Yep. No, they bought them.
They bought it. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I forgot the name.
She's awesome. I've loved Morgan Webb.
Really, really awesome. I always took them very seriously. I love these two together. They were great.
Yeah.
As much as Adam Sessler gets, a lot of hate with his comments, he always tells you the truth and how he feels, and I always appreciated his. And we could get into G4 failing again.
Oh, God,
but
yeah.
I mean, look, this was a time when this kind of media worked, right? That's why, like, you look now, you have all these influencers that they're just one person and they have 100,000 people watching them. You can't compete that style of content. I think that's a lot to why like G4 didn't really do well on its return. But I'm not going to get into that. But also, of course, Attack of the Show, even though it didn't always talk about video games, it still talked about the general tech and how I consumed really cool visuals around the tech world.
Yeah, it was like nerd lifestyle sort of stuff.
Lord says he looks like Rick from Rick and Morty there. He did a little bit.
Does.
Olivia Munn, obviously a legend at this time frame of life. Okay. But, oh, wow, John Farver was on it. But this is when G4 was amazing, and another way we consumed, video game media. And then, of course, like, we talked about podcasting. Giant Bombcast went as far back as 2008. I think podcasting, in my opinion, is one of the best forms of consuming media. But you mentioned Jeff, and we have to mention Jeff in his wonderful face here. Jeff is a good example, like a Jeff Gertzman, who really was one of the early guys that's like, I want to do journalism in video games. And that's what Jeff did,
Yeah.
He really got ahead of the ball. And the fact that he was a part of that video game show. But I worked with Jeff. on a show called YouTube E3 Live, which was a show he used to do that led into E3. Did you know this show?
I feel like I have watched it a couple of times. Yeah.
So and I told you I come from a media background, but this was 2019. I worked on his last. Look at me. I was a young and sprite guy back then in 2019 before the pandemic ruined me. No, I'm just kidding. But this is before the pandemic. I worked on Jeff's show. I can give you kind of like, I was a segment producer back then. Right here, shout out to Augie, one of the best producers out there. He's a behind the scenes guy. But this was the set. These are the producers. A lot of them still work for Jeff, but we talked about Jeff and what he does and how big the gaming awards are now, which just happened. He really figured it out, honestly, and just wanted to mention that. Like, I was lucky enough to meet him and work with him. Great.
Well, and I think they had just said that they did over 100 million.
I'll pull it up right now.
Yeah, I saw that press release, and and that's the thing, like, because
103 million stream,
103 million, so fucking cool. Here's the thing. So I've covered the Game Awards ever since like I think 2015 or 2016, and it started with with Final Encounter Cast, and it was sort of like one of the hallmarks of like morning show radio was to talk about like the Grammys or the Oscars, and I was like, oh, this is our opportunity to do that. And I think back, like whatever year we had started, it was like one of the first years that the Game Awards had been just purely streamed online, right? Like it wasn't in coordination with like Spike TV or something like that, right? And for some reason, Jeff had a really hard time making eye contact with the camera, and that was my big criticism. Like, come on, Jeff, look at the fucking camera. But subsequent years, whether it was Final Encounter Cast or we would do a special on it as Checkpoint, or continuing to monitor it as a part of Let's Play as well, I really think that the Game Awards has grown into something that really represents the AAA end of the video game industry very well. And I think it's a show that you can stand up there with the Grammys or with
it is now
the Tonys. It so is.
I think he's been trying it for a long time, and it's finally paying off. Like I'm very impressed. I mean, he's probably has so many sponsors now, and he has been doing this for years, and he really figured it out. And now he kind of, I don't want to say he owns it, but he's definitely owning it and really becoming the face of doing really important work around bringing us into the mainstream. And the Video Game Awards is turning into that. I mean, they had Al Pacino open the show, for Christ's sake, this year, which I thought was kind of weird in a sense, but and a lot it didn't really fit in a sense, but it was cool, I guess.
It also didn't seem like Al really knew where he was or what he was doing.
He even said, I can't read the prompter.
Yes, yeah, exactly. No, but like the first year that I had gone through and reviewed the Game Awards, I do remember it was the very first time that churches played before they were like a part of the Death Stranding soundtrack and stuff like that, right?
Sure.
And it was them and a couple of other music selections where that was the other big criticism of the show was, I love Churches. I'm a big Churches fan. I think that they're a phenomenal band. But the thing is what do they have to do with video gaming, right? Before they were a part of the Death Stranding soundtrack, what did they have to do with video gaming?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fair play that event was what got them to meet Hideo Kojima, which was what got them on the Death Stranding soundtrack. And fine, I can accept that now in hindsight. But it really bothered me that there wasn't more of a place for video game music inside of the Video Game Awards show. And in the subsequent years that I've been watching the Game Awards, that has been a bigger and bigger and bigger element of the Game Awards. The year that they had Eddie Vedder singing the song from The Last of Us. Like that is the kind of stuff that I think really elevates video gaming, not just sort of like in the mainstream, but in like as art, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff that I love, and I appreciate what Jeff is doing on so many different levels.
Yeah, and the way he does the when you see at the end of the show, the way he introduces the nominees for best game of the year, it's the orchestra playing all the top songs from each individual game, and I think that's fantastic. I think video game music should be respected immensely like it is, and I think Jeff does a really good idea. And even though it's AAA, he does make sure to focus on indie games. He makes sure that they get a recognition. He makes sure developers get recognition. All the important factors to bring the gaming industry into the mainstream. He's the right guy to make sure that we're highlighting, like you said, the right parts of it, right? Because that video game awards show you showed in 1994, you could tell they were just bringing in all these famous actors that didn't know crap about video games. But I feel like there's more people. Like, for instance, the director of that Knives Out, or the guy who did the Star Wars movies. What's his name? Ryan Wilson or Rainn Wilson?
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, Rainn Wilson. Yeah,
he's actually a huge gamer, and there's an interview where he's talking about, I have Gods of War on my backlog. I can't wait to play God of War. I can't wait to do this. He's a huge fan of video games. There's a lot of those people, like just a ton of them, and there's more. Rainn Wilson. Thanks, Bricks. Yeah. So that said, I mean, that's kind of like we've, in a very concise way, we've walked through how we've consumed media from before the internet to now. And I think Jeff's a good pinnacle to that, and how like we're seeing it really hit the mainstream now. Nate, I always ask a question on Twitter that relates back to the show we're doing. And I said, what was your favorite video game magazine back in the day? So I'm going to read some of these comments. Cool. We have a lot of them. Dark Redshift says Xbox World, if I remember the name right, and 360 Vision. I really just got any Xbox magazine I could. My favorites were the ones with Sonic Heroes, Half-Life 2, and Halo 2. Articles with Sonic and Tails front and center on the cover, and Tomb Raider Legend one with Sonic Riders in it. Another guy named Jay Merlin says PC Gamer was a favorite of mine. Yep, can't forget the PC gaming stuff too. Game Pro, easily followed by Electronic Gaming Monthly and Game Informer. PlayStation Magazine, Nintendo Power were great, but more specifically, loved Game Pro.
PlayStation Magazine right here.
Yep. Oh, nice. PlayStation Magazine, Tips and Tricks. Game Pro, I still had all my old copies. I probably had close to 100 of them. Retro Blast, which is also another good retro gaming podcast. Game Pro was my favorite. EGM and Nintendo Power. EGM, a lot of EGM. I was a big EGM guy too. N64 Magazine. The Club Nintendo Mexico. Wow, I've never heard of that before.
That's a new one.
Games Master was cool as a kid. Game Informer. Electronic Gaming Monthly. A lot of the same deal, but look at all these people that commented. This is awesome. Thanks everyone that put their favorite magazine here. We got tons of people to read. I'm not going to read them all. Here's an interesting one: a Super Famicom magazine.
Oh wow,
that looks cool. That looks cool.
Yeah. That's one of the things about the magazines is just the artwork that went into some of the covers is just incredible.
Yeah, and some of the Game Fan was cool too. Yeah, man, it's so I guess I'm gonna just put to kind of close out the episode, put it all in perspective. I'm not gonna ask you like what's the future of gaming news, but where do you see the industry heading now, in general as a whole? Since you're doing gaming news on a daily basis, where are we going right now? Where is it going, Dave?
Man, that is such a hard question to answer because, I think of the failure of things like Ven and the revamped G4.
Ooh, don't even mention Ven. Oh my God.
It's so difficult because like it really does feel like there's no mainstream appetite for video game content. And when I say mainstream, I mean mainstream media. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that people consume video game media. They go to Twitch, right? When you have something like Twitch established, why would you ever go to the radio or to the television to find video game content? That's just not where people are looking. And I think that's really unfortunate for mainstream media, because there was a point where they could have embraced it. And I think that point was around the time that they had killed the original G4. If they had kept the original G4 going, I think Twitch, in terms of content, would look very different today.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I don't know in what form that would take. I just think it would, like, they got out of it right at the perfect time for something like Twitch and podcasting to be elevated by an audience that was looking for content. And now they know where to find it. And so they just simply don't go to, TV or the radio or, any of those traditional media outlets. I think that the future continues to be digital. I think the future continues to be, live streamed. I think when you have streamers that are pulling in almost 100,000 people just playing a video game, it's pretty hard to argue that, they really need ABC behind them.
Yep.
But I do think that there are going to be some people who are streamers now who end up making the transition to becoming mainstream media folk, whether that's, a TV presenter or something like Ludwig. Ludwig is someone who can cross over into mainstream media very, very easily. The question is, do they see the value in doing that? And can traditional media create that value? Can they actually put enough, money on the table to say, come on over. The water's warm over here. So I don't know. It is a very, and specifically for esports media too, it's a very interesting time of flux at the moment. So the next 5 years are going to be very, very interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, influencer marketing is a huge, huge thing. And I'm a digital marketer myself. And it's just crazy that you have streamers that have celebrities joining their streams for like special events. And
exactly.
Hassan's a good example of the political side. He's a big streamer on Twitch, but he's really.
I'm a big Hassanabi head. So
right,
yeah.
So he's bridging that gap. And I remember when the election's going on, he's hosting like these 24-hour streams, like talking about it. I think that's really interesting. There's sports. There's DJs. There's everybody now on Twitch. It's not just gaming. It's becoming how we consume live media. Live media is so big now, and so important. Even the Game Awards, it's not so much a recorded show, it's a live show, and they're bringing it into the mainstream. So I'm also really curious, where are we going from here? But yeah, Nate, really cool having you on. And I do want to before I'm going to do a quick giveaway, but before I do that, just tell us where to find you and all that jazz and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So you can find me at Nate Benderama on Twitter. Feel free to follow me there. You can also find Let's Play Gaming News. Just search Let's Play Gaming News on anywhere where you can get podcasts. We don't really have a website per se, but anywhere where you can download podcasts, you can find Let's Play. And then if you really can't get enough of me, every Thursday at 1 p.m. on WDET here in Detroit, I have a 30-minute segment as a part of Culture Shift, talking all about video games. And you can find some of those segments over at WDET.org.
I love it, man. And it's really been, I could talk with you for another 3 hours probably, maybe more. But I do want to say I do a quick giveaway at the end of the show. Today I'm giving away Just Cause 4, the complete edition, whatever that means.
I love Just Cause.
So I have everyone loaded in chat. Let's do the giveaway. I love this giveaway tool. Here we go.
That's really cool.
And if you win, you could just DM me and I'll get you the code. And shout out to Bricks O'Brien who showed me this awesome giveaway tool. Who's it going to be?
Oh, Lloyd.
It's Genzo.
Nice.
All right, Genzo. I know where to find you, so I will get you the code for this awesome. I like Just Cause. It's pretty fun. And just cause it's the end of the show, I want to thank everyone. Just want to remind everyone, I know, it's a treat if you happen to be here for the lives, but obviously we are on YouTube. This will be up there as a full episode. We are heading close, Nate, to 100 Cafe BTW episodes. I believe this is the 95th episode. Nice. Thank you so much for the follow, Lightheart Gaming. I really appreciate it. And Nate, thanks for the follow, sir, as well.
Of course.
Really appreciate it. We have been doing this for quite some time. I got a brand new computer. We're back. We have a bunch of guests coming up, Nate. I'm really excited, heading right into the new year. I do want to say we will not be having an episode next weekend for the holiday reasons, but we are back the following week in the new year. So I'm excited. I have a bunch of guests coming up, a bunch of stuff going this year, Nate, as we head into the future of 2023, which is bright. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, Nate. Happy
Thank
New
you.
Year.
You too.
It's been fun. And everyone, just again, you could check in chat. I'll put it one more time, and it is on the description in the YouTube video, all the Nate's stuff, where to find him. Check out Let's Play if you just want a quick news feed. It's there. And I do want to say one thing before we go. Remember, we only get one shot at this, and I mean at life. So you might as well be nice to people. I'm Andy. That's Nate. We'll see you next time on Cafe BTW, a gaming morning podcast. Thanks a lot, Nate. We'll talk to you soon. Bye,
hey,
everyone.
Thank you for having me.